So again, thank you. Welcome. We have this is our application workshop for our Notice of Funds Available, or NOFA, for lasting affordability. We do have a presentation. We will be going through the application and then we'll have time for questions. Before we get going, I just want to orient us to how to ask questions. We do have, if you'll notice at the bottom of your screen on the ribbons bar, just kind of to the right of center, there is a Q&A box. And if you'll go ahead and I think you can open that box, it should pop out. But this gives you an opportunity to just ask your questions directly within this Q&A screen. That'd be the ideal place to put questions as we're going through the presentation. We will be responding to those in time, and then we'll take a moment after the presentation concludes to respond back verbally, posing the questions and providing the answers. You can also, certainly we'll be monitoring the chat, and so if questions do come in the chat, which is to the left of center there, we will respond there as well. Although the Q&A is the most preferred, but we'll accept either questions in either area. After the presentation and some announcements, we will have an opportunity for folks to unmute and ask their questions, and we can respond in real time then. We will be recording this. We will have this available and posted to our website for you to review after, and we'll also be posting the questions and the answers as a document there in our resources that we have on the website as well. So with that being said, let me introduce myself, and again, welcome. This is our application workshop for the Notice of Funds Available, or NOFA, for lasting affordability. For those of you who just joined, my name is Jacob Noonan. I'm a planning supervisor in the housing department with SCAG, and we're very excited to be rolling out this grant opportunity. The presentation today, our agenda, we will do a brief review of our Regional Early Action Planning Grants of 2021, or REAP 2.0 program. So we'll review that program. This is the source of the funding for this NOFA. We will look at the program timeline. We'll review how to apply to this NOFA, and we'll review the application and then provide an opportunity for questions and answers. And we will do, as I mentioned, we do have some general REAP 2.0 announcements as well. So with that being said, I'd like to turn it over to Zach Gardea, who will introduce himself and move us through the first part of the presentation. Take it away, Zach.
Thanks, Jacob. Hey, everyone. Zach Gardea, Associate Planner, part of Jacob's small but mighty team, rolling out this NOFA program, among other housing programs within SCAG's REAP 2021 program. So let's get into it. So with that, let's provide an overview to you all on the NOFA program and how that fits into the larger SCAG REAP framework. So for those unfamiliar with REAP, it stands for Regional Early Action Planning, and it's a state-funded program to help regions and jurisdictions with transformative planning and implementation activities to meet housing needs and spur housing production. The SCAG region is positioned to receive about $246 million from the state. It's entirely state general funds, which will help fund various initiatives and grant programs, which you will see outlined on the right. On the bottom left of the slide are the three principal objectives of the funding source that each project must meet. So those are accelerating infill development that facilitates housing supply, choice, and affordability, affirmatively further fair housing, and reduced vehicle miles traveled. The NOFA program falls under the Programs to Accelerate Transformative Housing, or PATH for short. The PATH program has three funding areas. NOFA is the program we're here to talk about today. For reference, NOFA is geared towards housing finance and loan products, primarily for trust funds and catalyst funds. Our other focus area is RUSH, or Regional Utility Supporting Housing Pilot Program. And that looks to fund innovative projects around housing supportive utilities to fund system-wide and sustainable utility infrastructure. And the third program within PATH is HIP, or Housing Infill on Public and Private Land. That's also a pilot program. And that will make more than $8.8 million available into two key buckets, which are scaling up housing on surplus or underutilized land, and increasing housing capacity along corridors and in area-wide infill locations. So the NOFA for lasting affordability, again, is making around $45 million available in the form of grants to the SCAG region. Who's eligible for these funds? Entities that manage an established or planned housing trust or land trust, or a catalyst fund that has a mission-driven focus on increasing affordable housing supply and lasting affordability. This includes cities, counties, and local housing authorities, JPAs such as our sub-regional COGs. The funding intends to support program level investments that either establish or increase new local and regional permanent funding sources, strategies and business models, or loan products and funding tools. So again, the program has about $45 million, and we have not placed a minimum or maximum cap requested amount on the application, but keep in mind that the proposal will be evaluated on cost effectiveness, among other criteria, which we will walk you through later. So how we defined a trust for the purposes of this program. Housing trust is a distinct fund established by a government agency or nonprofit organization that receives ongoing dedicated sources of public or private funding to support the preservation and production of affordable housing and increase opportunities for families and individuals to access decent, affordable homes. So that definition also works for catalyst funds. And again, eligibility does include cities, counties, JPAs, housing authorities, and nonprofit organizations. So switching gears a bit here, looking at the program timeline, including the evaluation timeline. Exactly 1 week ago today, we opened the NOFA application period on June 7th. The application period will stay open through 5 p.m. on July 31st. Throughout the period, applicants have access to office hours with SCAG staff to ask questions about applicant and project eligibility, or any technical questions related to the application. And in a few slides, I will demonstrate how and where you can schedule an appointment with us. Following the application deadline, we plan to evaluate applications and issue conditional award letters within 60 days of the deadline, and have regional council consider the recommended award list during October's RC meeting. At that point, we'll work with the awarded entities to prepare documentation for execution of the MOU. And we plan for that to occur in winter of this year and into early next. Our target is to have funds encumbered by January of 2024 and begin procurement thereafter, with project kickoff sometime in the spring of next year. Awarded applicants will have until December 2025 to fully expend their projects. So if we have project kickoff in the spring of next year, that would give the projects about 18 months to wrap up. So how to apply? We'll walk you through the next few slides where to access the application and how to apply. But just know that the application will be a form fillable Word document. and we'll require you to provide a few attachments that we'll go over in a bit. You should submit the application package once completed via email to housing@scag.ca.gov with NOFA application in the subject line. Again, no later than 5 p.m. on Monday, July 31st. So what you'll want to do first to access the NOFA webpage and application is to visit SCAG's REAP 2021 landing page. This is where you'll find the NOFA program materials, as well as information on SCAG's other REAP 2.0 funding programs, if those are of interest to you. All of this can be accessed at scag.gov/REAP 2021. From there, you will scroll down to the tab titled Programs to Accelerate Transformative Housing. That will lead you to the NOFA for Lasting Affordability section, where you can schedule office hours using that button, download the application materials, including the form fillable application, as well as the Excel spreadsheet for the project budget, timeline, scope, and deliverables, and find resources like the program guidelines, guidance on producing the required maps, and other pertinent information. So now let's start digging into the contents and sections of the NOFA application. The application opens with an introduction section that basically covers all of the information that we have provided up to this point of the presentation. The fillable portion of the application begins with the submittal checklist. So let's start there and work our way through the various application sections. The submittal checklist covers the 4 sections of the application, and we will go over them individually, and the required attachments. The checklist is intended to help keep you on track of progress made for the various attachments and ensure that every section has been completed at time of submittal. To be considered a complete response to the call, the application must be signed by an authorized representative, and we'll get into that in the next slide. Be completely filled out and be accompanied by all required attachments. You should be aware that there is a commitment to report on measurable outcomes, and it will be required once the project is awarded. We'll work with awarded entities on establishing what those metrics are and baselines, so that we're in a position once the project kicks off. All right, so section 1 is terms and signature. To sign and certify the application, a person must be duly authorized to sign for the organization. This can be a city manager, general manager, executive director, or planning director. By signing, this confirms that all information provided is true and correct, and that you as the applicant will adhere to the PATH program guidelines, and that the applicant will provide a local resolution by the entity's governing body authorizing execution of a funding agreement. But again, that local resolution is required after the application. So in other words, you won't need that for the application submittal. That will come around the MOU execution time. Next up is section 2, minimum requirements. To be eligible to apply for the NOFA, you must confirm that you are an entity that meets our definition. And this, again, includes public housing authorities, joint power authorities, city, counties, or nonprofit organizations that secure lasting affordability. 2.2 confirms that your project area meets the state's definition of infill. We have included an infill guidance resource on the NOFA webpage that provides descriptions of key terms used in the infill definition. But in short, your project must meet Part A, Part C, Part A, Part B, and either Part C1 or Part C2. And again, we have an infill guidance document on the NOFA webpage to help you better understand what is meant by, for example, destinations, urban corridor, or qualified urban uses. Section 3 is fairly straightforward. Section 3.1 is where you will fill in your organization's contact information. If you are an entity that is submitting multiple applications under NOFA, we ask that you list them out by priority. And again, that's only if you're submitting multiple applications within NOFA. If you're applying to another REAP 2.0 program, no need to rank them on this application. 3.2, it asks you to provide the title of the proposal with your geographic focus area and estimated project cost. For the focus area, we are looking for the absolute extent of the program's envisioned reach, but keep in mind that the service area in its entirety must meet the infill definition. From there, you will provide the estimated project cost, the requested amount, and whether there are any local matches or funding sources associated with this project. 3.3 asks you to briefly describe the budget, timeline, scope, deliverables, and measurable outcomes, and summarize how the funds will be used to increase affordable housing in your service area. Section 3.4 focuses on priority growth areas. Here you will check off which PGAs are located in or near the project area, and you will use SCAG's REAP 2.0 mapping tool to produce a map that you will submit with your application. And again, we'll show you how to access and use that tool later. Important to note that projects do not need to be in PGAs to be eligible for funding. However, PGAs will come into play in how you respond to several of the criteria questions. From here, I will turn it over to Jacob to go over the evaluation criteria, and then he'll turn it back over to me to get more into the attachments. Jacob?
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. So I'm going to spend some time providing an overview of our evaluation criteria, and then providing some summary information on each criterion and the questions that we are posing in the application. I do encourage folks to take advantage of our office hours as you have questions, as you're working through the application. We have set those up, and we're committing to providing as many office hours sessions as you need, realizing that there may be some limitations on staffing, but there's no limit to the amount of office hours. So if you have questions, we would like to provide answers. So that being said, a little overview of our evaluation criteria. We are scoring these applications out of 100 at 100%. You'll see that about 45% of the evaluation is based on the project's ability to lead to transformative, significant, beneficial impact. There's about 10% on equitable targeted outreach. There's 25% on how the project could leverage partnerships, policy matches, building local capacity, and then the ability to complete the project and cost effectiveness. 10% will be assigned to how the project meets and supports disadvantaged communities, and then 10% on how the project contributes to regional transformative change. Now, how we'll evaluate each of the criterion, each of the responses to the questions within each criterion is going to be on a 5-point scale. We've simplified the scale here for the slide, but so that we see that 5 points is exceptional, 0 is disqualified. A special note that your projects do need to at least hit a 1 in each of the questions in order to be considered. So a score of 0 would disqualify an application. In general, projects must align with the REAP 2.0 program objectives that were reviewed earlier. And we can do a quick review of those on the next slide, I believe. You must meet the definition of a transformative planning and implementation activity and provide a significant beneficial impact. And these are both in italics. They are defined by the state. We've provided them and their definitions in our application and in the guidelines, and we're open and available for questions as those come up. Additionally, your projects must include targeted equitable outreach and then align in advance the Connect SoCal plan. So first and foremost, leading to transformative, significant, beneficial impact. And within this criterion is really where we're asking you to look at those state-defined terms of transformative planning and implementation activity and significant beneficial impact. There's 3 question areas that align with those REAP 2.0 program objectives. That's to accelerate infill development that facilitates housing supply, choice, and affordability, affirmatively further fair housing, and reduce vehicle miles traveled. So the questions will focus in those specific areas within infill, AFFH, or affirmatively furthering fair housing, and then reducing vehicle miles traveled. To note, each of these categories do tie back into supporting how the project will help meet the 6th cycle regional housing needs assessment, or RHNA allocation. So within the first area, there are 3 questions. One asking you to describe how the project will achieve and increase housing supply, how the project will increase and expand on choices in housing, especially choices for housing that aren't present in the communities or in the targeted areas, but that are needed, and then how the project will lead to lasting affordability. In the second section under affirmatively furthering fair housing, questions ask you to address how the project will combat historic and past persisting discrimination, how the project could overcome patterns of segregation, and how the project could lead to fostering equitable and more inclusive communities. In the last questions section under reducing vehicle miles traveled, we do ask you to describe how the project will promote development that in fact that does just that will help lead to and reduce the vehicle miles traveled, aligning housing production within infill areas and connecting with other forms of transit. And then that dovetails into how your project could align and support SCAG's Connect SoCal plan. We've provided links to that plan along with state goals around planning and for housing and transportation in the application and within our resource section that you'll see on our website. So the second criterion, it focuses on equitable targeted outreach. There is a requirement that your project, that the team, either the applicant or the team that's going to be completing the work, commits to continuing outreach and engagement, especially focused within disadvantaged and historically underserved communities. There is, again, 10% for this, and the questions focused in asking you to describe your experience. So you as an organization, your experience engaging residents in disadvantaged and historically underserved communities, or if your organization doesn't have a lot of experience, that to describe the experience of the team that will be completing the work, and how your organization will gain additional experience in the project by completing the project. The second question asks you to describe your approach to that equitable engagement and how community organizations, community leaders will be included in the process and the program, how they will be informed, and then how information input received will be shaped within the project and how those project outcomes will be reported back out into the community. The third criterion focuses on leveraging partnerships, policy match, and building a local capacity. Within these areas, it's important to note that you don't need to score within all three of these areas. Within this criterion, you do need, however, to score at least a 1 cumulatively across these questions. This recognizes, for instance, that not all communities, for instance, have the ability to provide financial matches. They may not have the partnerships in place that are needed or necessary to achieve the work at this point, but that will happen down the road. So we'll start at number 1 under commitments. This question really asks you to tell us about your past policy commitment, how your organization has developed plans, processes, put actions in place that will really create feasibility that this project will move forward to a completed, successful deliverable. For direct grants, we'd also like you to describe, and these are direct grants that you'd be using within a loan product or within a financing tool, such as a housing trust or a catalyst fund, to tell us about how you've engaged and included, brought in other investments through either public or private philanthropic commitments, either financing or other partnerships that are developing and growing, expanding the capacity for your loan product, your tool, your housing trust. Again, as I started out on this slide with partnerships and recognizing that a reason why we're looking for you to just cumulatively score a 1 across this, that you don't need to score a 1 in every single area, is again that we recognize that every community organization may not have the ability to provide matching funds. However, we would like you to describe those matching fund sources if you have them. Additionally, those policies, those partnerships and partnership commitments from other organizations, and then to talk about how the investments of these REAP 2 dollars could lead to additional impact, could catalyze on additional investments coming into your area, leading to a bigger impact from this investment. Lastly, in this section, we're asking you to describe the ability to complete the project, to describe your organization's experience completing similar projects in the past, or again, the team that would be completing the work, their experience on similar projects. We're asking you to talk about your plan for ensuring that the project is completed on time and on budget. And within this area, you should make sure that your discussion, your description matches your budget and your scope that you've provided along with the project description. And then in terms of cost effectiveness, we're asking you to discuss how this infusion of REAP 2 dollars would be best used. In the case of those direct grants into a loan product or into a financing tool, we're asking you to provide some of your underwriting to describe the approach and your cost effectiveness from the past in terms of dollars per unit, dollars per project, additional impact and leverage that you've been able to gain or you anticipate being able to gain from outside sources with this infusion of cash. We're also asking you to describe the organizational structure, timeline for making the funds available if this is a new emerging loan product or a tool, and then if it's an existing, that your impact and how you expect your impact will increase with this infusion of funds. Certainly, we'd also like to see the affordability levels that you anticipate you'll be able to achieve and your rent targets. So our section 4, we're asking you to discuss how your project will prioritize disadvantaged communities. We do require that you provide a map of disadvantaged communities, and Zach will provide some guidance on how to access that tool and to pull down that map a little later. You must, in the projects, demonstrate how you're supporting and meeting the needs of priority populations. And so there's two questions within this area. The first asks you to map out priority populations. Now, these are priority. If you have a specific focused targeted area, you don't, that does not include priority populations, that is okay. What we're asking you to do, however, is to map out priority populations that you would be targeting within your project and your work. And then within that criterion too, of course, you would be discussing how your engagement strategies and approach to including folks in your planning and processes. Here, when you're mapping out the priority populations, we'd like you to identify, are they SB 535 disadvantaged communities? Are these SCAG communities of concern? Any TCAC, HCD opportunity area, areas, and then AB 1550 communities, noting the census tracts, and then providing that as a set of maps that you'll provide with your application. And then also use that set of maps to answer the second question, which is to describe how the project would then benefit these the priority population groups that you've identified in the maps and that you have recognized under your criterion 2 around equitable targeted outreach and engagement. So our last criterion, criterion 5, asks you to describe how the project would contribute to regional transformative change. And this is really the main criterion area where that planned growth area or PGA map or set of maps will come into play. And we'd like you to use those maps to help answer and respond to the questions in this section. So there are two questions under this criterion. One focuses on scaling housing supply and asks you to describe how your project will create that transformative change that allows or helps supports advancing and expanding the conditions that are necessary to scale housing supply, choice, and affordability, both locally within your focused region, and then also to think about how it would relate to other areas across the Southern California area. Second question looks at regional impact and asks you to describe how the project will be able to create or provide that both the geographic impact locally and within your greater region, and then largely across the Southern California area. And this is through aligning how your project connects with how it implements our SCS, or that's the Sustainable Community Strategy, and particularly certainly with housing, but then also with reducing greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled. I also ask you to discuss how your project could be replicated in other areas, how it's could be applied in similarly built contexts across the SCAG region. And then I think it's important to note here that we will be looking at proposals and projects in similar built environments. And so we'd be considering how the regional impact of a project within a specific built geography is aligns with or compares with that in others. So I think that you shouldn't be concerned that in this criterion that a project that would be proposed, say, in a suburban or a rural location could be compared directly to a project that would be proposed in an urbanized area, but that we'd be looking at contextually how each of those projects meets their is applicable within their built context and how they compare to other proposals within other similar built contexts. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Zach, who's going to lead us through the attachments that will be required for a complete application submittal. Take it away,
Thanks,
Zach.
Jacob. All right, so let's review the attachments that you will be required to submit as part of your application package. The attachments include the Excel spreadsheet of your budget and scope, the project area maps, and one letter of support. The support letter will need to come from a third-party organization and describe how the project meets local housing needs. Important to note here as well, we do not provide a support letter template. We've gotten that question with our other programs, but we do provide more guidance on what we're looking for on our NOFA webpage under resources. The budget and scope Excel spreadsheet can be downloaded on the NOFA webpage. Here you will provide the budget and timeline by task and as detailed a scope with clearly defined deliverables as you can provide. The first tab, there are two tabs in this spreadsheet. The first is where you will outline your budget by task. If you're adding funds from another source, you can make note of how much that funding source will contribute to the project. And you will also project the schedule by shading the duration of each task as you see in that screenshot. And again, for the time being, the expenditure deadline is December of 2025. So be sure that your project does not extend beyond that date. The scope, the second tab is where you will outline the scope, approach, and deliverables for each task. This will feed into the scope of work that makes it into the MOU and project RFP. So again, provide as much detail as you can at this point. And be sure to complete both tabs and submit this along with your application as an Excel file. The next few slides will cover the 3 maps that need to be submitted along with your application. We'll start with the infill map. This is where you will justify how your project area satisfies the infill definition. We have provided additional guidance under the resource section of the NOFA webpage on how to complete this map. And it also describes some of the key terms in more detail. You are allowed to provide either narrative-based justification or a visual map. So depending on your project area and the complexities and what part of the region you're located, you may be able to easily produce a visual map that shows how your project area meets Part A, Part B, and Part C of the infill definition, or you are welcome to provide a supporting narrative that describes how the key elements of the definition, so as you see there on the screenshot, A through F, are met through your project area. So again, including major destinations, transit, urban uses, making sure those key elements are covered in your narrative. The second map is regarding priority populations. This map can be produced using SCAG's REAP 2.0 indicator mapping tool. A link to this tool can be found under the resources section of the NOFA webpage with an instructions document as well. Basically, you'll want to take a screenshot of each layer where you have priority populations in your project area. What are the priority populations? Those are the bottom 4 layers on the mapping tool. So it's TCAC HCD opportunity boundary, communities of concern, disadvantaged communities, and AB 1550 communities. Important to note, project areas do not need to contain project area priority populations to be eligible for funding. However, projects must demonstrate how they support neighboring priority populations. And again, this will help support your response to several of the criteria questions as well. The third and last set of maps will be to identify priority growth areas. We're asking that you identify any PGA layers that fall within your project area These PJ layers include SCAG's high quality transit areas, transit priority areas, job centers, neighborhood mobility areas, and livable corridors. So those are the 5 PJ layers that you can find on SCAG's REAP 2.0 indicator mapping tool. And again, you can take a screenshot of each layer and submit as part of your application. Project areas do not need to contain all PJ layers, though the more you have, the more support you have in terms of responding to several of the criteria questions. So I think the final slide here before we get into Q&A and other announcements is regarding technical assistance. So again, we're happy to meet with you as often as you need through office hours to discuss your proposals or any questions you have while you work through completing the application. This recording and PowerPoint will be posted on the website in case you would like to refer to this at a later time. And yeah, I think with that, I will pass it over to my colleague, Alicia James, to make a few other SCAG announcements. And then after that, we will open it up for Q&A. Alicia.
Thanks, Zach. Let's see here. Hi, everyone. Alicia James, Senior Public Affairs Specialist at SCAG, supporting our REAP programs. I have a few short announcements to share with you all. Hope you all have been following our REAP 2.0 call for application schedule. Aside from the NOFA, which we discussed today, we also have our HIP program, our Housing Infill on Public and Private Lands program, open until July 10th. You can also expect our Regional Utility Supporting Housing program, our RUSH program, to be released this summer. So be on the lookout for that. You can receive all of these updates and follow the calls and the guidelines for each program at our REAP 2.0 website at scag.ca.gov/REAP 2021. And we also want to note that SCAG's full REAP 2.0 application is still pending the state's approval. So some of these programs are subject to change based on approval. So we hope that you will check these programs out. And with that, I also want to note some of our REAP 2.0 resources. I know that you guys kind of briefly touched on the REAP 2.0 indicator tool, but I also want to note our regional data platform, which includes our helper tool and our local data exchange tools, as well as our new big data platform provided by Streetlight. So these are some great data tools to support you in your application and your other planning work. And then finally, just wanted to share with you all that we are going through the RENA reform process right now. So we have our survey open through June 30th of this month. And we will also have a listening session on June 22nd and June 27th. And all comments must be submitted by June 30th. SCAG will submit a comment letter to the state with our formal recommendation. So you can review our draft recommendations with the link, and you can find more information at scag.ca.gov/RETA. And with that, I will pass it back over to our NOFA team for questions and answers.
Thanks, Alicia. So I'm in the Q&A box here. We have a ton of questions, so that's great. Keep them coming. I think we can start with the questions, some of the questions in the chat here, and then we can open it up for folks to ask questions verbally. So how about I tee up a few for you, Jacob, for us rather. So let's see. There's a question here. If the funding goes into a trust fund and we have 2 projects with gap funding needs, do we submit one application with 2 separate submittals responding to the NOFA? That's a good question.
So I want to emphasize again that this NOFA is for program level investments. So we are not investing in projects directly through these funds. These are for establishing or expanding the capacity at the program level within the housing trust, as we've defined that trust in the NOFA application. So in this case, you would be submitting an application for that loan product that you wish to expand. We wouldn't need a lot of information on the projects. Perhaps the projects would be helpful, but what we'd be evaluating is the capacity of that loan product that you're either developing or expanding, and on its ability to be lasting, on its ability to be impactful and to provide across the region. The projects, I think, would be examples of how you would put that into play. But again, we're going to be looking at the program level at that loan. Hope that helps.
Great. Appreciate that response.
And I would say, Zach, before you go on,
yeah,
for the folks for anyone who asks these questions, feel free to raise your hand, because we can have you come off mute and you can ask additional questions, to clarify if our answers aren't directly online with what your question was.
That's right. All right. We have another question here regarding prevailing wage. So if the funding goes into setting up a catalyst fund, do the loans equity invested from that fund trigger any labor hiring requirements such as prevailing wage or other restrictions?
In our criteria, we are asking you to describe how the project will meet all monitoring requirements of the funds. So these are state level funds. And so within a project, a capital project, there would be most likely wage requirements and other requirements that you would need to meet. And we would be looking to your answers to your approach to the project to see how the monitoring required for use of the funds would be achieved.
Great. We have a question here. Can a letter of support come from an elected official? Short answer is yes. Let's see. We have, can you please clarify 4.4 again in regard to not needing to include priority populations in the project area, but still needing to show how they are considered in the plan? A little confused about that distinction.
And I think that this kind of it connects in with another question that I'm seeing in the chat as well. But let's take this first: how to approach the PGA layers within the application. So we're asking you to provide to look at the PGAs to recognize where infill, where the Connect SoCal plan identifies urbanizing areas, transportation areas, and to discuss how your projects would fulfill or meet or connect with that plan and that planning effort. I hope that answers the question. Let me know if it doesn't.
Great. Let's see here. What if projects are not completed by December 2025, but they are started?
So again, I think that this speaks to that the focus that we have on the program level in this funding source. So that loan product, that financing tool, would need to be established by that expenditure date. We are working with the state to further clarify any other requirements. However, we do know that for capital projects, that there needs to be a commitment to be under development within 5 years following that expenditure date. So I think it would be safe to assume that by the expenditure date, you would need to have your program set up. And then within 5 years, the funds that were provided into that loan product, that financing tool expended within projects. All other projects, because certainly that's just one set of grants that we see issuing through this NOFA, but we also can support actions that would work to establish and develop your housing trust, such as staffing to provide development models, build out the programs and the structure of the organization itself. We can also fund new and emerging permanent funding streams. So we can fund cities and counties who want to look at, for instance, forms of tax increment financing, or they want to explore the possibility of general obligation bonds or an affordable housing levy or other permanent linkage fees or other permanent funding sources. So these are going to be approached a little differently in the contract where we have technical assistance or consulting or staffing. That would all need to be complete within that expenditure time period. But then, of course, with the loan products or the financing tools where the organization's asking us for a direct allocation of funds into that product, into that programmatic level investment, then it would that product would need to be established by that date and the funds expended into projects foreseeably within 5 years after the expenditure date. So that's a long answer to the question, and I hope that covered all aspects. Let us know if there's any follow-up questions on that.
Great. All right. Well, we have a lot more questions coming in. So there's one here regarding map layers. Many of these map layers are not available on the regional data platform. Can these layers be made available so they can be downloaded? Yeah. So we've gotten this question before. You actually can download a CSV file on the mapping tool. I think it's a bit complicated to describe without walking you through it. So I would recommend you set up some office hours with us, and we can show you then how to download CSV files.
Right. Zach, I see that Raul Ramirez has raised his hand. Why don't we take a live question? And then, of course, everyone, if we don't get to your questions in the chat, we hopefully, I think that we have time and we will, but if we don't, we will be providing all questions and answers in a document that we upload into our resources on the website. So with that, I'll ask Raul to unmute.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. So I've seen the prior workshop for HIP, and now we're on this workshop, and I'm a little bit confused with some of the similarities. So I would ask that you explain some of the differences between this funding application and the last one.
Right. Oh, thank you. So our housing infill on public-private lands pilot project, or our HIP pilot project, is focused on to support cities and counties to make regulatory land use changes that increase the amount of housing that can be built within infill areas. It also provides funding for technical assistance and consultant support to to landowners within infill sites to assess inventory and to complete some amount of pre-development activities in order to make those available land sites readied for housing development. So the HIP pilot program is focused on land and on creating the capacity to achieve more housing units. This funding source, the NOFA for Lasting Affordability, focuses on the financing and the financing structures. And so again, we can fund through this NOFA explorations and development of permanent funding sources, such as I just mentioned, through tax increment financing, bonds, linkage fees. We can also fund consultant support, technical assistance to stand up or to expand an existing or emerging housing trust or program. And we can also provide direct funding into housing trust organizations to support an emerging or to expand an existing loan product or other financing tool. So I hope that helps clarify.
Yeah, actually, that was really, really good. So this one that we're looking at now, the NOFA, is the one that would help increase capacity to a land trust, for example, or a
That's
housing trust.
Yes, absolutely. That is correct.
And real quick, could you give me a sneak peek at the incoming Rush application?
I can't. We're still
Okay.
under development with Rush, but that's a great question, and I do appreciate your interest in the program. I think that it's going to be very exciting when we roll that third program out that's under the PATH program, which for everyone else, the Regional Utility Supporting Housing, or RUSH pilot program, then focuses in on creating the utilities environment, getting utilities in place that would then support housing. So through the PATH program and its three arms, the HIP pilot program, RUSH, and this NOFA, we're looking at creating the capacity for more housing and sites for housing. That's in the HIP. The RUSH is to make sure that we have the utilities that are needed to achieve those housing units in place. And then this one, the NOFA for lasting affordability, focuses in on the financing and the finance needs of getting the housing built.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Let's see. So feel free to raise your hand and Raul, go ahead and lower your hand now. But if you do have questions, you want to come off mute, feel free to raise your hand. We're happy to take your questions right now, but we'll continue to go through the questions in the Q&A. It looks like we actually do have a couple other questions. Great. So why don't we ask just in order sequence, as Linda to come off mute. Thank you, Linda. I appreciate that. And then next up would be Grant Henninger.
I did put this in the Q&A, but we have two independent nonprofits. One is the Housing Trust Fund and one is the Housing Land Trust. But they work closely together. So do we apply together with two programs, one for the lending side and one for identifying properties and capacity building for the land trust? Or how do we apply, separate or together?
Linda, can I ask, is your application to increase your organizational capacity for both of
On
these?
the land trust side, yes.
Okay.
But that's also, we can also include, identifying properties in partnership with the cities and the county.
Right.
On the Housing Trust Fund side, it would be increasing lending capacity in permanent financing, which is a program we've been trying to do, but haven't had the lending capital.
Well, I don't want to tell you definitively one way or the other. I think that we're happy to continue to brainstorm with you in our office hours. I think that you could go in either direction, certainly.
Okay.
It sounds like either one of these would be an application in and of itself, right? However, depending on how you position the project, I could also see that this perhaps could be a singular application. For instance, if you're looking at this from a programmatic standpoint, that your land trust and housing trust in partnership are identifying lands, creating the financing, and then bringing those units that are achieved into lasting affordability under the land trust. I could see that as one program. I could also see it as two separate, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Really good question. Grant Henninger, hi.
Hello, thank you for putting this on and taking our questions. So for regional trusts, I'm actually working for 3 different trusts, but let's take Orange County, for example. The trust covers the entire county. Some areas of the county, kind of fall into the different categories. Some are high opportunity, some areas aren't, some areas are priority growth areas, some areas aren't. If we have a program that covers the entire county, how is that going to be evaluated when we have, areas, some areas that are, the areas that you want to encourage and some aren't necessarily?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This is a very helpful question, and I'm glad that you asked it, because I'm anticipating that a similar question may come up, if it already hasn't in our chat, around mapping infill and how do you approach infill when your program area is countywide. And so for both instances where, regarding, I'll take infill second actually, but so we'll take the question directly asked first around the PGAs and around, I think that you also mentioned the TCAC opportunity zones. Is that right, Grant?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so we're looking for a commitment to achieving affordable housing within high and highest opportunity zones in the TCAC opportunity areas, and to how you would be approaching housing and support for folks living within high areas of high concentration, high segregation, low and moderate TCAC opportunity areas. So in your application, talk about how this project approaches, those state goals, HCD's goals around mixing populations and incomes through the mapping, right? For the PGAs, we also recognize this more so connects into how we're thinking about our regional planning and how we're preparing or investing in housing that's going to get us to the goal of more housing in connection with transportation or within areas where people can walk to achieve daily needs, more so than having to get into their car and drive. And so think about it from that point. When you're looking at a program or a service area that would be countywide, that is broader than planned growth area boundaries, and also greater than infill boundaries that we're looking for. So for the PGAs, just really, you don't need to be within a PGA again, but we're asking you to provide some context and discuss how your project could impact and help lift up and support that more compact regional future growth around transit in connection with jobs, right? As opposed to more sprawl and more expansion. For infill and for these funds do need to be used within infill areas. So I do need to emphasize that. So even if you're looking at a loan product where you would have a service range that's an entire valley, for instance, or an entire county, we still need you to, we're going to be looking for a commitment to using the funds only within areas at project sites that meet that infill definition. So Grant, I hope that helps with your questions.
Yeah, I think so. So if, in our application, we just need to kind of describe our program design as, disallowing areas that aren't in infill, and then maybe like having a point score to encourage, if we're talking about like a loan program, encouraging projects that are in the high or highest opportunity areas or in the priority growth areas, something like that, and just describe that in our application. Is that kind of what, I'm looking at how to maximize our points in the application, right? So, is that kind of what you're looking for?
I think that's a good approach.
Okay.
I'd like to think about, excuse me, I'd like to think about it a little bit more, but I think that's a good approach. Certainly feel free to follow up with us with office hours. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I think in my list here, the next up with hands raised is the city of Montebello. And that followed by Charlie Leggedy, and then Christina. Oh, no, Christina went away. Take it away, city of Montebello. Hello.
Hi, Jacob. Hi, Zach. This is Jose. Good to see you both, and thank you both and your team for this great presentation. It's been very informative. As you know, Jacob, we are intending to apply for a EIFD feasibility study for various corridors here in our city. And I think we pretty much understand the gist of the application. We briefly talked about this before, but the one section that still keeps me up at night a little bit is the question of budget. and really sort of hitting the right numbers. I don't want to do too much guessing with the budget numbers. So any suggestions about how I can approach that section, given that we're not going to be directly retaining the consultant teams for the study itself?
Let us see what resources we can make available. And I think this in particular for other folks, this is related to helping a city set up a tax increment financing program. Let me see what we can provide in terms of resources, what we have for back history on different costing.
Okay. Terrific.
In general, I think it's important. I want to lift up that we don't have a minimum or a maximum request for these grants. However, we do recognize that we will most likely be oversubscribed. So we'll receive requests that top out and exceed the 45 million. We will then have to look at how we can provide funding across to as many projects as we can support. So we would be coming back to talk to folks about how we can, what we could provide versus what the request was. So do be prepared for that. We also are really going to be looking at feasibility. And so you'll see in the application, and I highlighted it a little bit when I went through the criteria. I probably could have highlighted it more, but we are really going to be asking folks to talk to us about feasibility and the realistic expectations for what your the funding can provide in this project. We're going to use that in evaluating what we can fund, really, because we want to assure that we're getting funds out across the entire region, that we're focusing and meeting the REAP 2 objectives and the goals, and that we're also able to achieve realistic, feasible projects that both you as organizations can achieve within the expenditure timeline and within the allowances thereafter, and also projects that we can manage and administer on our side. As you're filling out your budgets and your scopes, do be prepared and be aware that we may have to have some follow-up conversations about what we can support versus what you would be proposing.
And I will add that we have funded EIFDs and TIFs under our REAP 1 program. And so if we're allowed to share those budgets, maybe that can help inform your cost estimate.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll get back to you.
Yeah, we'll see what we can get up onto our resource section on our website around that.
Thank you, Jacob. Appreciate it. Thank you both.
Next up, Charlie Liggety. Hope I got your last name.
Yeah. Good morning. Yeah, thanks, Zach and Jacob. Quick question on like the Catalyst Fund. So we'd be a nonprofit managing a Catalyst Fund, but the sources of the funding from SCAG will be going towards setting up the fund. So legal costs, staffing, other costs. The funds coming from SCAG would not be going into a project, construction project itself. So I guess the question is, because the funds and our scope of services, scope of work to SCAG would be really like our nonprofit work, not constructing the project. The prevailing wage question kind of comes back to like, does that prevailing wage, like if we come up with a regulatory agreement with a developer to distribute our Catalyst funds, which again would be our own funds that we would be raising, not SCAG's, would that money then be tied to a prevailing wage requirement still? Like, would the regulatory agreement that goes along with any Catalyst funding include provisions with the prevailing wage? Just because there's lots of developers now that are doing 100% deed restricted, 80% AMI deals with zero public subsidy. So there's no other part of their capital stack that would trigger prevailing wage. So it's sort of not your traditional affordable housing development.
Yeah, let me make sure I heard the question correctly. So our REAP 2 money through this NOFA would be going to develop the template for this agreement. Is that right?
Yeah, it'd be going towards setting up, the funds and the internal capacity to set up the fund.
So it would all be consultant work. So let's it's my understanding. Now, I'm not an attorney. We do have some attorneys on staff here at SCAG, and we've been looking at this question, but I am not an attorney. I want to preface that. We would want to have your legal teams look at this as well. In this particular case, however, where it's just consultants services, I don't believe that there would be any prevailing wage requirements, right? It's only when you are putting the money into a, let's call it a capital P project, where it's, you're either funding, there is a line where you're funding pre-development work, for instance, where it's going to trip over into an actual project. You have entitlements, or you're working on entitlements, excuse me, or you're doing your, if the funds could go this far, you're doing some pre-work on the site, or perhaps some advanced environmental work. In that case, you're not putting the funds directly in as a loan into the actual development of the project, but that's where you have, consulting work that perhaps starts to trip the line into this capital P project category. Where, Charlie, what you're mentioning is just establishing an emerging catalyst fund, developing the underwriting criteria, the plans, the
templates and everything.
right, that would be
Structure.
going to stand up the structure of this organization, of that fund that will down the road eventually lead to capital P projects that will have funding going into them. I don't believe that you've tripped that line yet. However, we will want to continue to look at that, and definitely have your attorneys, our attorneys will look at that and make sure that we're what side of the line that we're on.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for asking that question. I think that's an important one. I know that the prevailing wage questions have come up in the chat as well. And just to mention, since I think it's great, I want to encourage us to just folks to raise your hands and ask questions. Again, we're going to answer all questions that are in the chat. So just if your question's in the chat, we don't get to it, we will provide answers in a document that we include under our resource section as soon as we can, most likely early next week at the latest. And with that, see if Christina Brooke, welcome, would you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. Noonan, and thank you for the SCAG team being on today. Sorry for my little bit of laryngitis I have here. But my question is in the chat, but it's really helpful to hear it verbally from you as well. So we were thinking that HIP links with the lasting affordability NOFAs in almost like a prerequisite way. Like HIP is used to vet the potential properties and project ideas that could be creatively financed by lasting affordability ideas. So the first question is if you could expand on how and if these two NOFAs dovetail. And secondly, on the lasting affordability grant, we noticed that there was a portion that said that you could grant, for example, to buy a residential property that could be converted into an affordability project idea. And so I wanted a little bit more clarification about that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, happy to answer both of those questions. So the first one, and I think that your recognition is you're very astute. We've developed the PATH program with these three funding areas: the HIP pilot program, this NOFA, and then again the RUSH pilot program that we mentioned that's coming later, through extensive outreach that we did over the course of a year or more. And what we were hearing from the greater region is we boiled down into this need for greater capacity for housing, both in terms of regulatory changes and just available sites. We were hearing that we needed more funding and funding sources and capacity to achieve and just to access funds in different areas of the region. And that we were hearing that utilities were oftentimes a real challenge. When you had good sites or you had good funding, you may be impeded by a lack of good utility investments. And so the design of the PATH program is designed that each of these funding areas will have a certain level of dovetailing, will have a certain level of layering. And I think it's going to be very interesting when we start to see how our funding programs and our investments that we're going to be supporting through this grant opportunity in the NOFA do overlay and start to support or are supported by the HIP pilot program. If you can imagine, your funding capacities, your ability to complete projects using different loan projects, finance tools, different partnerships, connections with philanthropy and otherwise is going to be greatly enhanced as cities and counties increase the potential for housing in those infill logical sites that link in with into areas where people are able to access transportation, are able to achieve, their all of their daily needs. So I think that thank you for that recognition, and it's very much by design that there is going to be some natural layering on these different programs. Christina, would you mind just refreshing me on your second question?
Oh, sure. Thank you. That was really great answer for the first question. Thank you so much.
Bet.
I was just saying that in the RFP for the lasting affordability project, there was an idea that you could purchase a residential property, like grant yourself money to purchase a residential property that could be then converted into like an idea that you might have, a bigger project idea, and say like the residential property doesn't really fit into your big project idea, but you could grant yourself the money to purchase that residential property. I noticed that in the RFA, the NOFA. So
yeah,
that's what my question's about.
Oh yeah, you bet. Thank you for refreshing me. So you will, as you read our guidelines in relation to the NOFA, and as you read the application that we have on our website, you will see that there's a number of different activities that we've listed out that are eligible under a loan program or a financing tool. So we're not going to fund that activity directly, all right? However, you could propose a loan product or some other financing tool, be it a grant or otherwise, that has a target for acquiring existing sites and converting those into affordable, converting those into either affordable rental or affordable ownership. That's one of those options that you could develop your programmatic level, right, funding loan product finance tool to target.
Fabulous. That's very exciting for us. Thank you so much.
Great. Glad to hear that. So I don't see any other hands up. I think we can take some. Zach, do we want to jump back into the Q&A? I know that we have folks have been asking questions there while we've been responding to the questions live.
Yeah, let's see here. We have a handful more questions. So the first one I see is, what are the types of development models ideal for this program?
So the state REAP 2.0 funding in and of itself is flexible. And when we've asked the state for what their parameters are as we're designing these different projects, the state has let us know that they are focusing on flexibility, that they're really interested to see how these grant funds can achieve these three objectives, right? So increasing supply, addressing and affirmatively furthering fair housing, and reducing vehicle miles traveled, and how we can approach that through these different projects, how we can lead to significant beneficial impacts, and how these projects can be transformative planning and implementation activities. And so really those are that's the structures, if you will, around what you could propose. It's very open, it's very flexible. So there isn't one, essentially there's not one development model, or there's not an ideal development model, if you would, but that there's this is an opportunity to propose something that you feel would meet these different objectives and criteria in the funds. I see we have a hand raised from, I may mispronounce your last name. I apologize for this, Cesar Arangari.
It's okay. Yeah, so the intent of my question was towards ground leases, because I've noticed that ground leases, in terms of how incentives are structured for the new zoning code in LA, they don't take that into account. But in high opportunity zones, ground leases could be a potential market trend that seems to follow whenever there is a wave of densification, and it's a way of combating gentrification as well and displacement. So I just wanted to confirm that different types of ground lease models that would even include like mixed use would be available.
Yes, absolutely. And I thank you for asking that question and including mixed use in the question, because I think we should recognize that these funds can be used for more than just 100% affordable projects, that you can have mixed use, you can have mixed income projects proposed, or that uses could focus in that area as well as just 100% affordable. So a ground lease certainly is a tool that could be proposed. However, I want to bring us back up to that programmatic level again, so that we remember that what these funds are for, what the application is for, is to look at developing that program, so that in this case, perhaps it would be a financing tool, how that tool would be developed, and then you would discuss and describe how it would be used. You could use examples of how it could be used in specific projects. Yet what we're looking to fund at this point is that the strategy, if you will, that mechanism or that tool. I hope that helps out, Susan.
So does that mean you were saying the word programmatic? So does that mean that you would need the city to implement this at like the zoning code level or some sort of an overlay? In terms of strategy, would it like a community toolkit so communities can make use of this strategy where you bring together owners in the community who have excess property that is adjacent to each other, and they could, do their own affordable housing project and possibly get incentives for doing that, basically for not selling out? Would something like that work?
I think that those are all possibilities, absolutely, and I think that we have office hours. I think when we're getting into the specifics of the projects, I think it'd be great to let's schedule office hours and talk about the approach and what could be considered. But I think everything that you laid out is possible. Certainly, the county or the city in this case could propose something. You could have an organization that's able to propose it as well. What we're looking to fund, however, at this point is the program. And so it's establishing what that program would be, not the specifics of funding individual projects.
Got it. Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks for that. And maybe the next question here, in regards to how they should approach project-specific information, I think how you responded, Jacob, may get at that. So again, when we ask for project descriptions, project area maps, we're really meaning the service area program level, outlook. So let us know if you want to follow up on that, though. Alrighty, couple more here. So let's see, on section 4.41 regarding priority populations, if the project will end up providing affordable housing units, does the project only serve those populations that are marked on the map as being directly on the project?
So thank you. Good question. So you would need to follow all fair housing requirements and rules and obligations. What we're looking and how that applies in leasing your units, having your affirmative marketing plans and providing a process that provides access and opportunity to all to achieve and access your housing. The criteria around and focused on the priority populations and how your project is serving priority populations is meant to encourage us to be thinking about how we're providing support, how we're working towards more mixes of income, which is a state goal for affordable housing investments, how we're able to, and then also it addresses questions that we've had and shows that these funds are available in communities that are considered, by the state and the tax the TCAC opportunity maps to be high and highest income areas, that these funds are still eligible and available for programs and projects that would be targeted to creating opportunities for more housing at income levels that are extremely low and moderate, so that we're again achieving that mix of income targeted housing, so that we ultimately achieve a mix in our populations, that people have opportunities to move and to join communities that right now they're essentially priced out of. So that's what we're looking for in terms of the conversation there. And we're really asking you to consider the engagement that's occurred so far and further targeted engagement that will happen under this project, to bring in and to invite and include in the conversations folks from disadvantaged communities, from historically underserved communities, so that we're assuring that people are part of the process, people are part of the conversation on developing the programs and the projects, and that these projects are serving the greater population of everyone who has needs for housing. So I hope that that answers that question. And raise your hand, feel free to raise your hand if it doesn't. And then I see Cesar, your hand is still up. Didn't know if you had another question or if you just had your hand up.
Oh, sorry, I'll take it down.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, there's a final question in the Q&A here. Can you define lasting affordability? Yeah.
And so, yeah, lasting affordability, it's an open-ended term. It really is going to, we're going to ask you to describe that through the criteria. I don't think that we specifically ask anywhere for folks to describe exactly what lasting affordability is, but that it's this connotation that we're looking to see the impacts of this REAP2 investments and how they will have a lasting and ongoing impact in the region overall. And so as you think about your project and you think about lasting affordability, think about, what is the ultimate impact that these funds, this project could have towards creating affordability now and ensuring that that affordability recurs or lasts, is revitalized over time, either through, for instance, a direct example would be a revolving loan, where we know that the funds are cycling into projects, cycling out into other projects, but then also how your project could achieve either a permanent affordability covenant, or that you could achieve some form of recycling affordability through, an ownership obligation that requires additional and continued affordability over time, as a couple of examples.
Thanks for that, Jacob. We did have another question pop up. The NOFA indicates that the actual project needs to be completed by 2031. Can you please expand on this requirement?
So this is related to the requirements within the state REAP2 program guidelines itself, where they note that for investments, capital investments directly into projects, that those need to be that there needs to be a foreseeable ability for the project to be under development within 5 years after the expenditure date. So the expenditure date for these funds, the cutoff is June 30th of 2026 for all reporting to be into the state, and so it's 5 years past that date. We want to be aware, however, that we're asking you to complete your projects by the end of by December 31st of 2025, in order to file your final reports by I believe it's the end of April, or it might be April 10th. And to have all of your closeout reports and everything else into us at that point, so that we can then final out the entire REAP2 program that we're managing at our level and provide that information to the state by that deadline of June 30th. So the effective date for these funds is that December 31st, 2025 date. However, for projects where you would be using the funds in for housing, for capital investments, you would need to be able to foreseeably utilize those funds within 5 years after the June 30th date. So by June 30th of 2031.
Thanks for that, Jacob. Another question here. In the case of a revolving fund, is it okay for some projects in the pipeline to go past the 2025 date?
I think the answer there would be yes. And let me know if that answer that I just gave didn't also answer that question to whoever the person was who asked that question. Let's see if my previous answer covered that. Zach, I think I'd like to provide a little information about our risk assessment and how we would be able to issue the MOU, which is our agreement that we would be executing in order to fund these projects for folks. You should be aware, have a look in our resource section. We do provide a document that's a summary of the risk assessment that will be required by our budget and grants office in order to enter into that agreement. We also have, there will be a number of requirements that your organization would need to provide. I did see a question earlier in the chat about this, about whether you would need to provide your audited financials, for instance, other organizational requirements. And the answer there is yes. If you do have questions about that now, feel free, please schedule office hours with us. Have a look at that risk assessment as well. And then let's follow up with the questions that you would have. If you're looking to, if you're a city or a county, or if you're an organization that's just looking for some funding for consultants to help stand up and build out your organization, your structure, or you want to look at some form of a tax increment financing program or other bond programs, you would be able to procure those consultants on your own if you're able to meet the requirements from our budget and finance office for your procurement process and then managing your records on that. Or alternatively, we could do that for you. We are establishing a bench of consultants, and so we would be able to procure in those cases where your organization wouldn't be able to meet the requirements that our budget and finance office has in place. And so this is also information that we can provide to you if you're interested in our office hours. And then you should be aware that we would have this review of your procurement process, for instance, in advance of being able to enter into that MOU and initiate the work. Folks, anyone, let me know if you have questions now about that, or again, feel free to schedule office hours with us. We're more than happy to provide additional information.
Thanks for that, Jacob. One last question here related to project development, whether it needs to be underway by 2031 or fully built out.
The language that's in the state guidelines is able to be under development by that date. So you would not need to be fully completed, just in some under development.
Great. Well, that clears out the Q&A box. Are there any remaining questions? If so, feel free to raise your hand, unmute. We do. All right, Jennifer Savage, please.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for putting on this workshop. It's super helpful to be able to walk through questions. And also thank you for having office hours. Quick question, and now I've forgotten. Oh, do you have any insight on the HIPP grants, whether there seems to be a large bench of competitors for that grant funding? It might help us get a sense of who are what the competitiveness might be for the PATH NOFA.
Great question. We don't ultimately know right now. We don't know right now what the overall turnout is going to be for the HIP pilot program. It is that call will close on July 10th, and so we most likely won't really know what the overall interest is until then. However, we have heard from across the region that folks are very interested in the HIP pilot program. We've also heard that folks are interested in this NOFA for lasting affordability. So we're anticipating that both programs are going to be oversubscribed, that they will be competitive processes. We are going to look at how we could, specifically within this NOFA, you'll see in the application that we will look at how we could fund in full or fund in part applications. And so, as I mentioned earlier, just be available and ready to have those conversations if we need to about, what we could do if we're able to issue the full funding request. Alternatively, what we could do if we're, able to issue a partial funding request. I hope that helps with your question, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking. I should also say, since, there's been a couple of questions that have come up around the intersection between the HIP pilot program and this NOFA for lasting affordability, we're very interested to hear your thoughts. So please, I welcome you to schedule office hours with us. Or even I think that what I can do, if everyone can see the chat, I'll drop my email in the chat. I'd love to hear thoughts that you have around that intersectionality, how we can really assure that this NOFA for lasting affordability does intersect and support the HIP pilot program, and vice versa, that the HIP pilot program supports this NOFA. So I just posted my email in the chat for folks. If you can't see the chat, it's my last name, NOONAN @scag.ca.gov. There is 2 periods in our extension. So NOONAN @scag.ca.gov. Look forward to having conversations with you. Feel free, please, if you have thoughts around how these programs can intersect one another, we'd love to hear from you. We'd also love to hear your additional questions that you have as you embark on this application and filling out the application process, application itself, and submitting your responses. Zach, do we have any other questions that haven't been answered in the chat?
We don't. So I think with that, we can close out.
All right. So again, we will be we will be capturing these questions and providing responses, and we'll put that document under our resources on our webpage there. You'll find all of the application and the resources for this NOFA for lasting affordability there at scag.ca.gov/REAP 2021. Zach, I think that we're going to be posting a couple of times, right, during the open call.
That's right.
Questions. So we're going to batch questions that we receive at all of our office hours and provide those in a confidential manner under the resource section. Is that right?
That's right.
Great. All right, everyone. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I think that we can. Thank you, Jessica. So we just had in the chat, you'll see there's a couple of links posted. Our colleague Jessica Reyes Juarez posted that the recording for this will be available next week. She's provided a link to that. That link does go into that the scag.ca.gov/REAP 2021. There's a sub-page there at that landing page where you'll find all of the path information. So if you have a chance now, save that link that she's posted to access the recording directly off of the path page. And then Jessica also posted the link to schedule office hours. And we really look forward to continuing the conversation with each of you as you work towards your complete application.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. Looking forward to more.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.